You mean I should just eat it? Okay, I can start with it. I'm technical. It was supposed to be, it was supposed to match. Anyway, I'd like to welcome you to this very special session. We call it a special treat for the reason that we don't normally get a chance to just sit down and have conversation like this. So what we really would like to do during these next couple of hours, in the first half, just having this conversation. So just I'm hosting this conversation, and I have invited colleagues who I respect very much to talk about. They have actually told me that I should have sent them what I want to ask them in advance. And I thought I did, but it seems that nobody received it, so I didn't send it. So they are very nervous about what I will ask. And I would say that I get the questions from the audience anyway, so it's not me asking, it's everybody wants to know something about these people we respect so much, that we hear a lot about, that we read a lot about. So we read a lot about what we have been reading work, and we have been admiring them for what they have been doing, but we don't really get a chance to ask them those questions. What inspired them to write those articles and papers and books? What's behind the scenes kind of story, right? So this is like sitting in a studio trying to figure out, what's going on in their mind, what brought them to this point, what inspires them, what makes them tick. So we'll do that for about an hour, and then I let them go to the table. They will have one table each, and then you can get to have more intimate setting with them. Okay? How's that sound? Great. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to let you know too that this is live stream. So we actually hope you don't mind that, it's like in a big studio, right? So we've been interviewed by me. My name is Ratana Tripathi, and I'm a project director of the Tributino Global Partnership for Small-Scale Fisheries Research. So I started after all of them, right? Because they have done this way before me. So I have a lot to learn from these people, and I would like to, have an opportunity myself even to hear a little bit about what brought them to, what is it about small-scale fisheries that get them so excited and that they wanted to work on? Can we just start there, and then maybe I will do other questions later. But in terms of introduction, so this would be your way of introducing yourself as you answer these questions. So maybe we'll start from, I think it was alphabetical order in the program. So, Fikr, would you like to kick off? Just tell us, what small-scale fisheries will get into this?
Thanks, Ratana, for bringing this session together. This was her brainstorm, and she kind of wants to calling us gurus, but it's sort of too much. As we'll see in the morning, just too much, and then also calling us graybacks, as in gorillas, but that event has some repelling effect, and it ended up in some people dropping out. So she ended up calling us grayfins and something else. Silverfins, rather. Yes, silverback would be the term for the gorilla biologists. I actually never thought about myself that way. But I guess start in the old days, back in, say, 1970s, in the happy times when there were no quotas. There were no roving bandits that was supplying globalized markets. I got my first taste of small-scale fisheries working in the Canadian North. These were subsistence fisheries, native indigenous people, and we didn't call them small-scale fisheries at the time. They were just small fisheries with boats. Except they actually caught a lot of fish. Emerging as a PhD in marine science, I was more on the biology side and the formal trading and resources side.
Of course, I think we all started realizing this is framing.
And this work started as a my early work started as looking at the impact of large dams in the James Bay area in Canada. Too close. Was the comment? Yeah, so I started looking, okay, this sounds louder actually. Started looking at these indigenous fisheries in the context of the impact of the big dams in the James Bay area in subarctic Canada. There was no commercial licenses, they were not selling, they were just catching for home consumption and for their social networks. But as a sort of a fishery ecologist, when I tallied up the numbers at the end of the season, I discovered that they were actually catching tons of fish, literally tons. So that gave me some insight on how small-scale operation could actually result in that kind of catches. And later on, I worked on some other small-scale fisheries elsewhere. But at the time, the usual terminology was artisanal versus industrial fisheries. Emerson wrote a synthesis in 1980, and I used the word artisanal, which sort of sounds funny because, you know, like artisanal is something that would be applicable to somebody who crafts, you know, knickknacks and so on. But the term small scale really emerged, I think, after the 80s. The contrast still was with industrial, and one piece of work that inspired me was a British investigator named Thompson, who was reacting to the energy crisis of the 1970s. And he made the comment and produced some numbers that that these artisanal fisheries actually produced more fish per ton of fuel used, which of course was easy because a lot of these were unmechanized anyway, so it was sort of very low input. But that got me thinking that maybe there was some way of analyzing these artisanal or small-scale fisheries that shows some advantages or disadvantages compared to industrial fisheries. You have to remember, in the 1970s, we were very much in the mode of fishery development, that everybody would end up being a larger fisher. So if you had a small boat, you'd get a bigger boat. If you're unmechanized, you would become mechanized, and they did this actually in Jamaica in the 70s with disastrous results because they ended up overfishing the whole area. This is looking at the Caribbean, Mexico, or sorry, Jamaica. So what we did, we produced a paper in 1989. That probably was my first small-scale fishery paper. And we followed up on Thompson's idea. He had global figures, but did not have any empirical data on small-scale fisheries, but we did from the Canadian North, from the Great Lakes, from Turkey, from the Caribbean. And we actually showed that not only these small fisheries were more efficient per ton of fuel used, but they also created more jobs per investment. They produced more fish per ton, more jobs per unit energy used, and so on. So there were all kinds of interesting stuff that came up. But again, you have to remember, there were no statistics at the FAO level that compared, for example, small-scale fisheries with industrial, or had any estimates on the numbers of fisheries and so on. some of that work we followed up, and one of my co-authors is here, Patrick McConney. Patrick from the Caribbean. The four of us got together, Patrick, myself, Robin Mahan, also from Barbados, and Richard Polnack from University of Rhode Island, and we produced a book in 2001. And the word small scale does appear in that one. And we tried to make the sort of a how to run small scale fisheries for managers, but I don't think too many managers ever read that. Some graduate students read it, and some colleagues sort of read and nodded and so on. Patrick tried to keep it very practical, but we still managed to make it rather academic. So parts of it, as one graduate student put it, she said, this is not for beginners, you know. So our impact, unlike TBTI, I think was very limited in terms of impacting and influencing managers, and that actually still remains a problem. So maybe I'll stop there.
Yes, thank you very much. Maybe we ask Muniba to go next. What got you into small-scale fisheries?
Thank you, Ratana. My name is Muniba Isaacs. I come from South Africa, University of Western Cape. I'm also a professor there at the Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies. So I'm a child of the 70s, and I guess when many of the silver fins were writing their papers, you know, I was running around in a coastal community. So I come from a fishing community outside Cape Town in the metropole area. But what I have to say is that for me it started all with the anti-apartheid movement. And with the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, we had three issues that we fought against. That was race, gender, and class. And if we look back now, 2018, we're still dealing with issues on race, gender, and class. And those were the three pillars of that built the apartheid state. It was the capitalism and it was race-based. And as you grew up in a state where you see the inequalities, you see the inequalities in terms based on race, you see the inequalities based on education, you kind of feel and you live through those inequalities. And I think that for me, going through the post-apartheid democracy and taking a long turn from becoming a teacher, because that's the only job that was allocated for you when you are brown in South Africa. There are specific jobs that were allocated for you when you are brown. So I became a teacher first. And then after becoming a teacher, I started studying further. And I got this scholarship to go to Norway, from Cape Town to Tromsø in northern Norway, where Sven has his institute. There was a scholarship to work on fisheries, and I think for me it was a full circle, bringing together, running around on the coast, bringing together the inequalities, bringing the race, gender, and class, and looking through that in terms of, I wonder how our South African government is going to look at fisheries, how they are going to view fisheries reform, to what extent will we continue with the inequalities, to what extent will communities be excluded, to what extent will there be elite capture. So those are all the key elements that drove me to work on fisheries. So for me, academia was a sideshow. For me, it was the activism. And to be able to link activism in terms of those issues that I've often felt strongly is also the issues of social justice and economic justice. As those issues, to what extent can use those lenses and look at small-scale fisheries policies. So for me, I cannot write an academic paper if it is not engaged, if it's not reflective, if it doesn't have an issue that is pertinent to small-scale fisheries. I have been working in small-scale fisheries in South Africa and in the region for the last 20 years, and I have traveled from the one side of the coast to the other side of the coast in South Africa. And if you know South Africa, all of us know the peaceful transition that we had to democracy. We love Mandela, everybody loves Mandela. The minute you step outside South Africa, the euphoria of Mandela is all there. But what are the lived realities of poor people? What are the struggles of poor people? And what are the struggles of particularly small-scale fisheries? So for me, I can continue the story in terms of small-scale fisheries, but I think I'm going to stop there to give maybe.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, so we want to just go around you first, and then we'll have more opportunity. What about you, Sven? What got you? Here's another microphone. It does. It fixed it. Try this one. They told me it works. You just have to almost.
No, this is.
Oh boy. Okay. Maybe it's better.
Well, I think for most of us, when we think back on the things that determine our lives, you know, what determines, decides what made us become what we became, we have to admit that it's a series of coincidences. You meet people, you find yourself in situations that you hadn't planned, and it makes an impression on you, and it changes things. In my case, I was more interested in what is happening in my home region, Northern Norway, than in fisheries per se. I was studying business economics in Oslo, and I got to realize that everything I was taught there had absolutely no relevance to what was happening in my own region. And at the same time, this was in the late 60s, at the same time, there was a guy who was then pretty young, but he became famous, perhaps one of the most famous social scientists in Norway. His name is Ottar Brox. He wrote a book called, the title of the book was called What is Happening in Northern Norway? And one of the things he argued in that book is, it's a description of what is happening, and the reality that he describes is very different from what you learn in business school textbooks. But one of the things that I remember making an impression on me was that he arguing, well, we always look at our region as made up of sectors, different industries, and our region, Northern Norway, is sort of it's the sum, the aggregate of different sectors. He said, why don't we look at our region as made up of communities? And then we go to communities rather than sectors. And I thought, as a methodology, that was an interesting approach, an interesting perspective. And when you do that as a graduate student, you go to communities in Northern Norway, you discover what's there is small-scale fisheries. And my interest in small-scale fisheries, I think, was generated from that experience, from discovering actually what was happening very close to you, which you do not necessarily discover just by growing up there. It's you know, you tend to take things for granted. You know, there's this notion that by Marshall McLuhan that you know, the fish is the last one to discover the ocean. You know, so if you grow up in that, you know, you don't think about it as something special. It's how the world looks. It's when you get that distance to what is close to you, which I got in business school, that you start to realize there is something going on that you haven't paid attention to. And that's basically what happened to me. But I must also say that Ahmed presented my supervisor, and Kato Vadel. He was just returned after 3 years in St. John's. He had done his master's studying the purse seine fisheries in southwest Norway, but he went to Canada when Memorial University was opened, and did some important work, which in itself made an impression on me. But what happened actually was that I happened to be at a meeting somewhere outside my hometown, and at the dinner, just by coincidence, I happened to sit next to him across the table. And for the first time, a professor took interest in me and what I had to say, and I found that so amazing that I automatically started to refocus some of my interest from the region per se into the fisheries, what was going on in these communities. And one thing followed the other, and I started locally, and I worked locally for a number of years. After a while, you spread your interest, and you start to travel, and you realize that there's a bigger world out there, where many of the issues are largely the same. So there's always something new to learn on issues that you are already sensitized to from home. And yeah, and here I am.
That's great, thank you. I have microphones, so it's that way. So, what about you, John? You just tell us a bit about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My name is John Kurian. I'm from India. I didn't know that Sven did business management. I did too.
Oh.
Also very frustrated, questioning the role of relevance of business management, what we were taught in the early 70s, and its relevance to the Indian economy. So I passed out, unhappy about the education, but wanting to do something, you know, maybe in a rural area, and this was it. But finally I got co-opted, and I was working in industry. But again, as Sven says, just by chance, I took a bus, went to a fishing village to meet somebody. And in that village, we went to the beach, my first exposure to an occupational beach. And fishermen were coming, and the person who was with me was a social organizer in the village, and she introduced me to the small-scale fishers there. And one of them said, "Oh, why don't you stay with us and help us?" So I thought, wow, that's a good idea. So let me give up my job and stay.
That was that easy, John?
Well, you know, I wanted something else from what I was doing. So I was happy to grab on to this. Although it meant a big drop in incomes and all that, that was not an issue. It was a question of getting peace of mind. That was 1973. I stayed in the village for 4 years, organizing a cooperative to sell fish. We used to sell fish in the town and to many institutions in the town. And it so happened that one of the institutions where I was selling fish was called the Center for Development Studies. This was in one of the prestigious institutions in my country for applied economics and some of the leading economists of the country who set this up. And here I was on a van delivering fish to this canteen of this institution, and people thought this is not the usual fish seller, so said, what is this, where is this? So I said, this is a cooperative, it's a small fishermen in about 30 kilometers from here. So they said, oh, could we come and take a look at your cooperative and so on? So I said, welcome. So all the big economists came, saw what was happening, and the founder of this institution said, why don't you come and write about your experiences? So I said, I'm not an economist. He said, that hardly matters. In fact, it's good that you're not an economist. So just come. So I said, no. I'm here, I haven't handed over, I'm just training people to take over the work, so I can't come and do a 10 to 5 job. But if you will allow me to, have my freedom, I will deliver the outputs, working paper or seminar or whatever. So that was agreed. So that's how I got into academics. So I started as a practitioner, development practitioner. I've always been a reluctant academic. I don't think I've even a single paper in marine policy. so I'm certainly a reluctant academic. But I've written a lot. And as Muniba says, I've written a lot only on the basis of what I have done, not about any theories or things like that. So that's it, and that's how I got into small-scale fisheries.
Thank you. Okay, so Ron, what's your story?
Well, it's a bit along the lines of the other speakers. I'm the product of really post 1968 student in Germany. I happened to go to a very conservative economics department at the University of Tübingen. And at that time, there was an extremely strong self-governing body of the student. So there was a students' parliament, and each faculty had the students' representation. And I happened to be also in this economics faculty representation, and I must say at that time I had a very tense relationship with professors. So I'm very glad now to have found so many professor friends later on in my career. I should say I'm an outlier here, because I have neither published widely, nor am I a professor, not even I have a PhD. I think I'm here mostly because of my work related to, well, the long time work related to small-scale fisheries and the small-scale fishery contribution to the development of the small-scale fisheries guidelines. Now, having said that, how did I come into small-scale fisheries? So there I was a fairly left-leaning master in economics, coming out of the university, having lived in a commune for 4 years. And but a few months after the final examinations, I got this card from Mercedes, the economics analysis department of Mercedes-Benz, inviting me to present myself. So of course it was at that time for me only too natural to just tear it apart and throw it in the basket.
Being such a leftist, yeah?
Well, it was that time, I was no K person. So what else to do? And I applied for a postgraduate education with the German Development Institute. And they had a graduate course of 1 year, including a field study in Central America. But there we worked on agricultural products, the economic effects of more processing of agricultural products like primary agricultural products like coffee, wood, cacao, etc. After this education, this was actually the time when I was twice physically assaulted with armed people. A guy in the military in Guatemala City, and another guy at the coast of Honduras. Some people we interviewed during the study of the unions, we learned later on that they were actually imprisoned or even killed.
Okay.
It was a very, very tense situation. Having said that, now I have to come to fisheries very quickly. As a graduate of this postgraduate course, we basically had all opportunities at that period. You know, this was in 1978. So we got this list of so-called associate expert positions in the UN system, and they thought, being the son of a small farmer, the Food and Agricultural Organization would be the best for me. and so I got a list of about 7 projects. And how do you select? So I selected more on the basis of interest for the country. And the first project, the first listed, or the first, my priority, I said, was an integrated rural development program in the northeast of Brazil. The second was a regional small-scale fisheries program based in Sri Lanka. And then I got this offer for the Sri Lanka project because somehow the Brazilian project didn't come off at that time. So this is how I landed up then in Madras, because by the time I was recruited, the program headquarters had shifted from Sri Lanka, from Colombo to Madras, today Chennai, called Chennai. Well, Chennai is Tamil, at that time was also called Chennai, but most people refer to it as Madras. And well, you have to imagine being a leftist graduate and then getting into the UN system, you land up in Madras, and you realize you earn probably more than the Prime Minister of India, something like that. So I got this place in Besant Nagar, which is at the coast of Madras, and it was really a few hundred meters from fishing communities. But I quickly decided to invite some other people, and they were volunteers working for a Swedish development agency, Swallows, among others, to help women cooperatives to make shirts like John is wearing. So always 2 or 3 of these people from Sweden stayed with me, or from Denmark. In any case, what then happened is that this project, which was part of the Bay of Bengal program, which was a big Swedish funded program, mine was funded by UNDP. The program manager had the idea that one should do a cost and earning study on small-scale fisheries. No, well, on fisheries. And as the Bay of Bengal program only could work on the east coast of India, professional for the South Asia, and he wanted to see something covered at the west coast, which is Kerala, where John comes from. I haven't. Well, I traveled with a colleague of mine. We traveled to Kerala, and this is where I met John. And well, to make a long story short, with John, I basically learned everything what I even know now or so. he was my foremost teacher, but I was happy enough later on to, well, fairly quickly later on to meet Francis Christie, whom I actually asked to be the backstopper of me. And then he came down to India, and we traveled around, and this is how he developed his idea of turfs. Because he realized he was, so to say, the person who conceived individual fishermen quotas, he called it, not ITQs. And he realized that was a complete no-go in these kinds of fisheries we were visiting. Well, John didn't mention anything about the cost and earning studies, but maybe we can do that later.
Okay, that's great. That's wonderful. Lots of interesting beginnings of you, which is wonderful. Maybe we can just do a quick round of, I'm just curious about what would you consider the best moment in your career? We'll start from Monica. What is the best moment in your career?
I would say the best moment in my career was when a group of fishermen approached me and asked me, do you want to use your PhD thesis? Can we use your PhD thesis as evidence to launch a class action case against the ITQ system of South Africa? And I've just completed my PhD. I've collected interviews, testimonies of fishers around the coast, and that formed then part of the evidence data of a class action case that academics, civil society, legal practitioners, community-based organizations, and fishers led to challenge the ITQ system in South Africa and the path to develop a small-scale fisheries policy. I also want to add that the small-scale fisheries policy in South Africa also framed and informed a lot of the voluntary guidelines that we know now in terms of small-scale fisheries. So I think for me, that was one of the highlights, but I will also come back in terms of what that also tended to be some of the challenges.
Sure, we'll get to that later.
Thank you.
On. Yes. What about you, Rolf? Highlights. Best.
Well,
There might be many. Just choose one.
well, I think the highlight was the adoption of the guidelines.
Yeah. How did that feel? What happened that day? Tell us.
Well, I already had retired, so basically it came about half, no, 3/4 of a year afterwards. Well, I think we just felt elated and enthusiastic, and I should say that because of the position of one country, which definitely would not have taken this position today as the government has changed. It was such a tense coffee session of night. Do you remember?
Yes. And the one
should-
country I know well. As
Yes.
well. That's the thing.
And I should really thank all those Canadian scientists, researchers who have signed this letter which I think was possibly absolutely critical so that coffee really got this tune. So I think, you know, maybe let me say some other thing.
Sure, please,
And that is, of course, the 1984 conference. Well, there were two conferences. I was on the side of FAO officially and quite unofficially, and you might call it in a way somewhat subversive, on the side of the Fish Workers Conference, which John Kurian was the Secretary General.
John didn't seem to remember.
He apparently hadn't mentioned it yesterday when he talked about the history of the guidelines, because this really then led to the formation of ICSF, which came out as a mandate. Or you want to say more about this, John?
You're still in John's moment.
Because he was a kind of the father of the ICSF, so in a way he is the grandfather of the guidelines.
Okay, quite history there. What would you say to that? You must have some other things to top that up.
No, I mean, yes, '84 was a great time, and I think the best moment was the fishermen or the fish workers of the world meeting in Piazza Navona, and you know, celebrating with their songs and the dance and so on, and all the citizens of Rome were there watching this great event. It was sponsored by the municipality of Rome, our conference. So this was a great event. So of course when we organized it, we didn't realize that it was the beginning of something big. But that was, for me, one of the best moments. There are lots of others. But.
Okay, thank you. Very good. Again, many moments, of course,
Yeah,
but...
that's a tough question, because depending on which day and the mood I'm in, I might give a different kind of answer. But let me do something a little bit different. My moment, my personal satisfaction moment, is a long one, the one I'm going to mention. When I switched from science and decided to do a postdoc, because I thought it was very interesting to work with small producers, indigenous people. A lot of my senior academics said, you're ruining your career. You have a promising budding career, and you're changing directions, and you're going into a sort of an uncharted area, not very popular. You won't be able to publish, you won't be able to get grants, you won't be able to get positions. And they were quite wrong. But it took a while, of course. So the lesson, I guess, for graduate students, postdocs, younger academics, if you find something interesting to do, and if you're keen to do it, and if people tell you that that's a bad decision, not a wise decision, not a practical decision, just ignore them and go ahead with it anyway.
I was going to ask that question also. That's good you talked about that. So don't listen to any advice, huh? Just follow your own intuition.
Follow your bliss.
Follow your bliss. That word too. Uh-oh. You have how many
Well,
moments?
I also have the same problem of, certainly those moments you do not necessarily know it in the moment, but it's an insight. You discover it, or you have to realize that was an important and a happy moment.
Mm-hmm.
Like some other people here, the adoption of the SSF guidelines was such a moment. I was part of the Norwegian delegation. 2 weeks we negotiated them, and that was hard work. Every sentence almost in those guidelines are negotiated, and that was hard, but it was also extremely interesting. But I also had a similar experience when we worked with Jan Koyman on this project that led to this book, Fish for Life. And we were 20, 25 people sitting from different parts of the world, from different disciplines, sitting together in different parts of the world, trying to write a book as if it was written by one person. By some miracle, I think I wouldn't say we managed it to the full, but we did a pretty good job. And in hindsight, I think it's one of the best schools I ever attended. And to me, in hindsight, what was happening then, now I understand it, but I didn't understand it then. But this was an experience of transdisciplinarity. That was what was going on during those 2-3 years we worked on this book. And I think all those years were memorable, all those years were important, and they also had a lot of consequences for me personally about my interest in what was happening, what has happened since then. Again, our happy moments are not necessarily just the consequences of what we do and what we accomplish, but the process we are actually working with, the people you meet, and the things you are able to accomplish together. That is always a happy moment.
Since you have the microphone, maybe we'll just continue with you. How about we just ask you, now this one might be a bit more tricky, but see what you can do. What about the moment, what do you have any regrets? Things that you wish you could have done better?
Well, there's always things you could have done better, but I don't think you necessarily regret.
Oh, okay. No regrets.
Well, at least I have nothing to complain about. I have been fortunate. I have had the opportunities I needed.
So maybe go back, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago, would you have done exactly the same thing you did?
I may have made different choices that have led me in very different directions, and whatever directions I would have taken, I would have strived to be content and happy with what I've done. But you don't live that way. You live with your choices and your consequences. So you're simply not capable of answering how would you have been more happy if you have chosen differently? And is there any regrets with regard to the choices you made? I don't have them. This is I'm grateful for all I have experienced.
That's great. Okay, let's hear. But let's different. Maybe something about what would you have done differently, or what would you like to see done differently? Not you yourself. What do you have like to see?
I appreciate rewording of the question, and I'm not as good a philosopher as Sven is. I'm happy with my choices, but if I were to do it all over again, I probably would have tried to have more of a policy impact. I worked with communities, I worked with community groups, I worked with with NGOs and so on, but I rarely work with government, and I've not put any time and effort into making an impact as just about everybody else here has on national and international policies. I very much admire you guys for the small-scale fishery guidelines. I guess I'm being an outsider, a bit skeptical that they're going to change things that much, because I think the real issue is changing the managers, and that's going to take a whole generation. I put my effort into educating people. There are actually several graduates here of my work. So it's trade-offs. For example, my colleague Patrick did a PhD and then took that PhD and actually implemented as the national fisheries policy. And then after a while, got bored with it. But you know, like he had huge amount of impact as the director of fisheries in Barbados, all based on his PhD project. That's just amazing. I never thought about doing anything like that or being part of an international effort. I explained to John that Canada, government of Canada probably doesn't even know I exist. Whereas, you know, you have impact at the level of India, international. Sven has represented his country in these things. I just didn't get into it. I could have, I guess, but just didn't.
I think that's a good point though, because not every time the opportunity like that would appear, right? And there's this tension too, I think, with people feeling like you need to be able to do more, be more active, taking part in all this activism and stuff. But I think there's different roles, and I think what you have done in particular, especially teaching students and really, you know, providing a foundation for many of us to be able to do the other things. I think that's very valuable. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to turn to John, because I'm curious. I have heard you say this a couple of times about this reluctant academy. What is this all about?
Well,
No, John.
just what those words connote. I mean, you know.
So what's wrong with being a real or full, or what is the
There's nothing
opposite
wrong
word
with being
of
a
that?
real academic. It's just that I don't like to be, you know, put into that category. So that's why I say that. If you ask me what, I guess I prefer to be a reflective practitioner. If you want some definition of what I would like to be. So that, and I regret that I did not use the many opportunities I had to learn from fisher folk around the world adequately. I've learned a lot from fisher folk. I can give you any number of examples for researchers or others of what I have learned and what I have unlearned from this. So I regret that I didn't use these opportunities, which probably in hindsight, you know, I had more opportunities and I didn't use them. I mean, so that's my regret.
Okay. Well, Rolf, what about you? You want to take that question, or you want another question?
No, let me add one more rewarding issue which I would like to mention, and that is really, and if you know the complexity of getting staff appointed in FEO, I was extremely happy that Nicole and Franz and Carlos Fuentevilla were appointed, and I was, so to say, leading the selection process. So
It was
I
all you.
think, well, it was not all me, but I had a good reputation in the fisheries department of FEO. So I think that was very rewarding. One thing which I regretted is really to maybe be a bit behind in taking up this issue of small-scale fisheries and food security. There was an opportunity in 1996 FEO security, but it was not only my fault. The department was literally not involved, and then there was the process of developing this right to food guidelines. In a way, within FEO, that was the start of a human rights approach. And again, there was too little engagement, and I should say maybe that there's so many important things to say about ICSF, the International Collective Support of Fish Workers, that that was also one point which they a bit missed out. So maybe it would have come up earlier on the agenda if we would have engaged more.
Thank you, Monica.
Same question?
If you like.
I think that for me, just latching on to what John is saying about being a reflective scholar, I think there are moments in that academia when you work very closely with social movements, when you work very closely with communities, and also with policy. Your academia almost allow you to take a step back. And I'm often conscious of your position as an academic, where you step into arenas and you can step out of it. You're not there all the time. And I often hear from a lot of local fishers. I mean, a big issue was the privatization of fishing rights and the ITQ allocations, and how that was mainstream in coastal communities to an extent where you are so involved in driving policy, in advocating for policy, in looking at, there were basically 3 strategies where you're looking at raising awareness, you look at basically organizing, and you also try to kind of look at getting a seat at the negotiation table, and this is the policy table. That policy table is so filled with compromises. You compromise so many of the issues that you step into in that policy environment. And then when you step back and you reflect on the process of policy process, you reflect on the local reality, you reflect on the mainstreaming of ITQ policies and the privatization of that. And you sometimes wonder, is it a core group of people's ideology that are translating into policy? Or are you actually reflecting the realities that are at local level? So I often had that kind of regret. Is it your ideology that you push, or is it for an alternative, for a collective, for maybe a turf, as Rolf mentioned earlier? You come in and you see that this is the alternative, and in actual fact, the reality is that what people or local fishers would tell you is that I want a private right. I want what they want. I want what the other fisher or the other one that could buy a car or a house, and I want all of that. So all those trappings are part of mainstreaming. So you reflect and you think that is alternative, what are the alternatives? There's a lot of the alternatives that are already appropriated in language that are apoliticized. And then you kind of have to start thinking, maybe the alternative is within the system. And you start compromising yourself in all of that. And I have realized that life is filled with compromises. They are very, very shadow issues that you find different shades that you need to step into, and that compromises will be made. But in the end, you have to really think, why are you doing it? Who are you doing it for? So I think it's often where I sometimes get extremely upset with civil society saying, oh, you academics, you sit in your ivory tower, you don't really know what's happening in local communities.
And some of them you don't, to be fair.
I've taken back a lot of a personal attack in terms of Actually, no, that's not the case. And I'm engaged. I do all of this and what you see. But yeah, I think that these are the kind of different arenas that you step in and that you step out. And in actual fact, you are, as Sven said, you are in a privileged position. You are in a position where you can decide when to step in, when to step out. And I think that we also need to be conscious of.
That's a great point. I am aware of the time because I wanted to make sure that you all get a chance to sit in the table, each of you, to chat among others. So I'm just gonna do one last round, and it's gonna be about the future, the hope, the dream. So this would be, what would you like to see happen in small scale issues as we are moving forward? What would make you really happy? I don't know who wants to go first? No, nobody wants to go first. What would make you happy? More happy than you are now, of course.
No, I mean, I don't think small-scale fisheries or fishers are going to go away. I'm optimistic, at least in the tropical world, because nature favors them. I mean, the way fishery resources are distributed in a tropical ecosystem makes small-scale fishery the most viable, the most sensible, economically, socially, culturally. So I don't think it's going to go away very soon. So that's a sense of optimism which keeps me going. So it's not as though, I mean, we can have scenarios where we wonder, are people going to come back into fishing? Last year I took my group of students whom I teach back to the village where I started my career. And I was very surprised to see what I saw there. After 45 years, the fishers that I worked with initially could not read or write. They used their thumb impression to sign. In the village today, lots of people have gone out and so on, but the fishers are still small scale, beach landing, they are educated, they are very content, they have improved their standard of living in wonderful ways, and they're very happy with what they are doing. And they owe a lot of this to the origins of having created a cooperative, of having struggled, fought against merchants and middlemen, and stood their ground, and understood that, the collective action that they undertake is what is necessary for their own individual betterment and the betterment of their children. So that contentment which they expressed to me and my students, it gives me hope that this is a bright future.
That is great, thank you. Any other thoughts from others?
Yeah, actually, my feelings are pretty similar to John's, in that despite predictions of small-scale fisheries being converted into large-scale fisheries and into real business, all these part-time fishermen becoming professional full-time fishermen, etc. Despite all this, despite the 1970s vision of factory fleets, well, we know what factory fleets do to stocks, and it's not very pretty. And it's not just the tropical multi-species fishery, John, that supports small-scale fisheries. Canada also has small-scale fisheries. They've been pretty stable. Much of the Canadian Maritimes, lobster fishing, which doesn't lend itself to industrialization, You know, much of British Columbia salmon fisheries are small-scale fisheries. Sure, there are seiners as well, but it's there because it makes sense. As you say, it's the nature favors them. Yeah. So, but I do have some fears that very large international companies are grabbing up fishing rights. There's some studies coming out of Sweden. Take a look at. There's one in PLOS ONE that talks about the 10 largest companies. I think what's going to happen is that they're going to be gathering up more and more of the offshore rights. They may not be able to come in too close inshore, but there's an oligopoly developing, I think, in world fisheries. Japanese companies, Norwegian companies. Interestingly, not too many American companies, but there's some major business development which lends itself very well with this sort of quota and consolidation of quotas. One of the things we've seen is that as soon as you introduce an ITQ system, a quota system, it quickly sheds some of the smaller producers, and it consolidates as a smaller number of units, which tend to get bigger in terms of holdings, but smaller in terms of the diversity, the number of people employed, and so on. So I see big companies grabbing the offshore and making incursions inshore, and unfortunately I see them as marginalizing even more the small-scale fisheries. So there's a fight. That's it. There's a fight coming up.
So can I just follow
and we
up?
have a right. We have a role in this.
What is it, right? I mean, because many studies show that kind of consequences that you just talked about. What would be the thing that we need to do then in order to,
just what TBTI has been doing, I think is very important. But just having the volunteer guidelines isn't going to do it. It's going to take a whole generation of new managers at the national level. And the problem isn't the word voluntary. All international guidelines are voluntary. You know, what FAO produces, what UN produces cannot be imposed on nation states, right? Nation states have to make their own rules and regulations consistent with that practice. So whether you have the word voluntary or not is immaterial.
Great. Sven, want to?
What the people here before me has talked about reminds me about the difference between negative and positive goals. And I often find it much more easy to reflect on what I want not to happen than I want
Okay, that
to
will work
happen.
too. Yes.
Because I find it often hard to think of how, what constitutes some kind of, future where problems will be solved and we will all be happy, etc. I'm not so sure what that would be, but I'm pretty more confident about talking about the things that I'm quite sure will make us all unhappy. And I think some of the things are happening. It would be, for instance, a catastrophe, if fisheries resources, marine resources are privatized. If they end up as a property of multinational, that would be, I don't know what to describe it, but I cannot possibly imagine how people would prefer such a future. And there are a number of things, and there are processes that seems to move us in that direction. And I don't think we are paying the attention that we should. We can only hope that this will not happen. There is a trend, for instance, I can see it certainly in my country, where the fishing industry are becoming increasingly relevant for coastal communities. they have no connection, no sense of responsibility, they live a life that is largely separate from the communities where they originally came from. And therefore, communities that are totally dependent on the fishery cannot trust the fishery anymore. And why is it like that? Well, it has a lot to do with the things that Muniba doesn't describe, because you see these tendencies all over the place. And for my own region, that would change the social structure. It will have enormous consequences. So whatever I would like to see happening in these communities, this is certainly a thing that I would not like to see. So how can we sort of re-embed fisheries into their communities? How can we do that when policies seems to drive the fishery in the other direction? I think we, for instance, need to think differently and innovatively about fishing rights and how those are distributed, and what kind of responsibilities that follow the right of a quota, for instance. It's not. It cannot be such that it creates the kind of disembeddedness that we see in fisheries these days, where the link that was always there between the fisheries on the one hand and coastal communities where people are and always were relying on the fishing. That kind of link is sort of disappearing.
Are you being optimistic or pessimistic
I'm
about this?
quite pessimistic.
You are pessimistic.
I'm quite pessimistic.
The man of no regrets, but you're pessimistic.
It refers back to who said, we cannot see much trace in what we are doing in public policy. We have been arguing these and warning against this trend for a very long time, but you don't see any alternative thinking. There is a path dependency there that doesn't seem to lead in a kind of direction that points to a future where these coastal communities are secure. We cannot take for granted anymore that what is good for the fishing industry is good for these communities. There is a conflict there. It wasn't there before. And we have introduced policies that sort of drives these two things away from each other, and I think that's unfortunate. And I can hardly imagine how our region would look like the day when the fishery, and I should also say the small-scale fishery, because they are under same kind of regime. So you also see that even small-scale fisheries are sort of disconnected, disembedded from coastal communities. And I think that's unfortunate. And the tragedy is that you don't see all that much pushback against that tendency, even in the fishing industry and even in the small-scale fishing. So this is an unfortunate thing. I hope it can point to some things that suggest that this is not the scenario. But I'm not all that optimistic. I cannot say that this is going to go well in the end, unfortunately.
Let's hope that Rolf and Muniba may have something a little bit more uplifting.
But I should say that what I like about the SSF guideline is that they represent a very different kind of scenario or different kind of paradigm than those kinds of policies that is dominating the situation in my country. Unfortunately, I don't think the SSF guidelines have made much impression yet. And there is something that is unfortunate about the SSF guidelines, which I also said many times. many times that there is language there to suggest that they are partly for small-scale fisheries in the south.
Well, at the same time, Norway
I
does
think
spend money.
they have spent money as long as the SSF guidelines are not implemented in the north.
Okay.
Keep them away from let them be. I think Norway played a fairly constructive role in negotiations with the guidelines, and they have been generous with regard to their implementation. But I think you would look long and hard to find any traces between the guidelines, the spirit of the guidelines, the paradigms of the guidelines, into the kind of domestic policies that are being introduced in.
So the small scale fisheries in Norway are not really being taken care of, not able to take advantage of the guidelines or that.
No, I don't think to the extent that they should. And the proof is in the numbers.
All right, so perhaps we move to Rolf and then Moniba.
Yeah, well, in relation to Norway, maybe there's more activism needed. Somewhere in the program booklet, I came across some reference to where there's some group in the States, in the US, is actually trying to refer to the guidelines in US policy. So I found this very encouraging and hopeful. I think really the great benefit of the guidelines is this human rights orientation, and I think we should build on this strength. And in this Science Cafe today, well, I should say this morning, there was Andrew Song's presentation, which I found very interesting, and he specifically mentioned how difficult it is probably to see an uptake on the human rights side, compared to others. But then, of all the Science Cafes presentations, there was to my observation no reference at all to rights issues, to human rights issues. So the link I didn't see. Well, the food security link was said, but not the right to food. Why not include it? And make it more powerful in this way. So in a way, this is my hope. But having said that, and looking at the larger political developments we see around the world, then I think what we see is a backward bending curve in terms of human rights adherence and fulfillment. So on that side, I'm more pessimistic what we see, but certainly like John and the others, I'm hopeful about the continued existence of small-scale fisheries, and I think the other important part of the guidelines is this holistic view and a greater focus on livelihoods. And what I can see from the 1980s, when I walked with John in Kerala fishing communities, and there I saw extreme poverty and the changes he mentioned. And these changes happen in spite of the fact that the fishery, by and large, has increasingly become degraded and overfished. So what we see is a kind of a discrepancy developing between the livelihood situation and the status of the resource. in the sense that the livelihood situation improves with general development and also with the demands by the organized communities for public services. I think maybe we should somewhat get away somewhat between seeing small-scale fisheries and this direct link between livelihoods, well-being, and the resource situation. I'm not saying that the conservation of the resource is not important, but we should not underestimate how important the greater well-being of fishing communities is for their ability to actually manage. So very poor people, I think, are often cannot afford to manage the resource they depend on. Maybe something to be further examined.
That's a wonderful point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not feeling very optimistic, I must say, about the future for small-scale fishers, mainly because of the political landscapes, mainly because of the mainstreaming of privatization. In Africa, the conservation narrative is often problematic in terms of how small-scale communities and fishes are removed from areas that they traditionally fish. And also blue growth. Ocean's economy is almost, filtering in all the policies of the different countries. From the African Union, we've heard the African Development Bank, and also we have in South Africa what we call Operation Pakisa, which means hurry up to development in terms of spatial planning, and also in terms of aquaculture, large-scale aquaculture. And in no of that policy you can see to what extent small-scale fishers are featuring. It's large-scale aquaculture. It's declaring aquaculture zones where communities live and not making lives for community better. So the struggle for small-scale fishers has to continue. And I'm often worried about the state of organizing within social movements and civil society to take up these issues of small-scale fishers. I feel that there's been a lot of organizing at national and international level. But when you come down, and this is, I'm specifically speaking from South Africa, when you come down to local community level, community-based organizations, I think we've failed the communities. But there are also some kind of highlights, and I think that for me, the story of Sarah Niemand, she comes from a small community in Buffelsbergsbaai. And she basically said that because of the tenure rights and the voluntary guidelines of tenure rights and the voluntary guidelines of small-scale fishers, all of that, her spiritual right and her right to access the resources and the land that she lives in is what is protected. So for me, whatever had been done at international level, social movements, key people that are sitting here in pushing the voluntary guidelines, For a fisherwoman like Sarah Niman to articulate that means that awareness raising has happened, Nicole, Sebastian. These civil society people who are in the organization. I think we can ruffle each other's feathers a bit by saying what you're not doing. But what you are doing is raising awareness, and more of that needs to happen. I think there's too little investment in raising awareness and also training and capacity building for people to take up activism and struggle and lead their own struggle. With that document of the voluntary guidelines, the 10-year guidelines, the right to food, these are all key documents where rights can be articulated and awareness raising. So I think that these are at one level that needs to happen. Also, I would say that we've just done the last 2 days is the transdisciplinarity and looking at how do we link action research to transdisciplinary research to impact change in coastal communities. And I think that to ignore part 2, it's ending now, needs to kind of consider some of the issues that I think small-scale fisheries need to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's give a big round of applause to our Dory and Celestine. This basically ends the first half of the conversation. I'd like now to invite everybody to go to a table so that way people can get a chance to chat with you on a more one-on-one on a smaller intimate level. Okay. Sorry, I'm sorry, would you like another thing you'd like to say? Yes.
It would be very interesting for me to know what kind of questions come out.
Okay, so if this works for you, we can definitely stay in this format. You're also more comfortable? Okay, maybe now we'll open the floor. How about that? Would that be all right? Okay, Evan, you have to speak up a little bit. We're still on live. Okay, people who are watching us on YouTube, we continue, part 2.
Okay, thank you so much. This was working trip to Thailand.
Just to capture it.
Okay. What kind of qualities or sort of, what characteristics would you like to see in the next generation of academics or practitioners working in the small-scale fisheries arena?
Evan is ready to be that, so. Sure, please join.
I want to give you a story. In 2005, I went to Cambodia for the first time. And in Cambodia, they implemented the small-scale fishery guidelines long before the guidelines was, at least in the realm of tenure. They gave tenure to communities by taking away tenure from individuals and giving it to the communities. So this had happened in 2000, and in 2005, I went there for the first time. So I was very curious as a reluctant academic to find out if this has happened, then it must have had some change in the lives of people. So I was curious to find this out. So I went with a translator and others, and I was working in the Inland Fisheries Research Institute, so with some colleagues to a village, and to find out if there has been this big tenure change. It must have resulted in some change in your life. So what was it? So here I was, in my capacity as a researcher and policy influencer, and talking to the communities, and I posed this question. Okay, you have now got these rights, community rights. The fish is available, And so what has happened? I mean, are you eating more fish? Do you get more income? Do you, etc., etc. The kind of questions that as researchers we would ask people. So this was translated and everybody just sat there like that. There was no response. So I thought probably, the way I raised the question was wrong. So then I asked, when you got some fish, you consumed it, then you must have sold the rest of it, and you must have got some income. Was this useful for you to send your children to school or buy some medicine when somebody was sick? So I elaborated this. This was translated, and still there was no response. Then finally, the head of the village got up, and he spoke very eloquently for a long time, almost like telling me, I felt like he was admonishing me about certain things. And then finally, he repeated a word 3 times. And in my ears, it sounded like Saraipiyap, Saraipiyap, Saraipiyap. And then he sat down. I got the translation. And then I asked the translator, what is this last word that he used? So he said, it was freedom. So then when it was elaborated to me, you know what this man, he was the head of the village. He was saying to me, look, you have asked us so many questions about the benefits that we have got from this change of tenure. You were right. We got more money, we got more fish, we are eating more fish, we are all this. But you didn't mention the most important benefit we got. And that is the freedom that we got in the change of this tenure. The freedom to access the resource. So I was thinking, well, this guy must have read Amartya Sen or something like that. Or rather, Amartya Sen must have talked to him. Because, he was saying that, it was the freedom that he got. I think this is one of very humbling moments for me as a researcher, that we assume that rural communities, small-scale fishers and others, they only think in terms of material change. No, I mean, these things are also so important, and these are what form the basis of the change that is required. So I think that's why the guidelines is, and the tenure guidelines and the SSF guidelines is important, because it is based on this, the value of freedom and the human right to that, to make the change in our lives. So this is what I would tell young researchers, that you have to change your own mindsets in order to find out what is the way to move in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, please, a question from the back there. Eva, do you mind just bringing a microphone to, and then we'll come back here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Tero Mustonen from Snow Change Co-op in Finland, and we represent a large portion of Arctic small-scale fishermen from Siberia to Greenland and so forth. And I also lead a small fish base in Kesälahti. The question that I have for the panel is that it's kind of a twin view, and perhaps a suggestion also for the next opening of the next Congress. What's your view on the direct voice from the communities? You have given us a very throughout historical, and John gave us a very good view yesterday on the pathway to get to this and the guidelines. But what seems to be a tension is the direct voice from these communities in describing how things are. The oratory, or the kind of a direct voice that was, at least for me, missing in today's opening. If we are discussing small-scale fishermen, how come there was nobody at the opening who was a small-scale fisherman to talk about it? So I would conclude by the second observation, that it seems that through all of your work you have chosen that perhaps tactical or strategic choice that you will see change through the structure. By working in there for many, many years, you will produce guidelines and rights that are then recognized by the UN or by the system. But certainly these communities have also inherent rights. Their rights are not defined, they don't have to be defined by anybody, they exist as inherent rights. And there are peoples that can use direct voice to convey those things. And in a way, the academia or the structure is then reflecting these inherent rights to the extent they will. It's always a difference, but nevertheless, I'm perhaps formulating a question: how do you see this? More of the direct voices. Our colleague from South Africa gave a portion of that, referring to the 3 fights she was going through with the race and economy and things like that. But yeah, I'll stop there, and I would ask for perhaps a reflection on the whose voices are you using and how would you see this changing in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody? Eva? Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm responding to the question directly at me. I'm very conscious of my voice, me being a voice for fishers, because although I come from a fishing community, although I understand the issues very well, I often feel that portraying the voice of fishers is on one level, it is effective on one, when you have to deal with government and policy and you can articulate the issues. Because sometimes they listen more to a professor than what they would listen to a fisher. And that's where it stopped. I've tried to use methodology of foam, where I foam the voices of the people I interview. And through foam, they tell their own stories in their own language, in a very free way. And I found that that's more powerful for me when you as a researcher take a step back and let the fishers articulate their own stories and their own voice in terms of a particular issue and their vulnerabilities. The one particular issue I'm working on now is criminal livelihoods around the abalone poaching in South Africa. Very delicate, but they share stories to me in their own way, which I don't necessarily want to say. And I think that for me, stepping into that realm of using film as a documentary or evidence is one way of the researcher or the academic stepping back and the fisher's voice is coming through, is one way. But I am very conscious of that particular role to play in articulating the voice, because they do have a voice and also a very strong voice.
Would you like to say a few things, yes?
In the tenure guidelines, there is a provision which states that rights which are traditional or customary and which do not need to be written anywhere, and I would associate them with inherent rights, that they need to be identified and recognized. So there is an obligation, but it's a voluntary instrument. But there is, in theory, at least an obligation for states and for other actors, including the private sector, to actually go out and identify and recognize these rights. But often this process is not happening, and these inherent rights are just trampled over. But on the issue of voice, I think Amartya Sen has said that an important part in his theory on the human rights approach, I think it's called his 2002 paper, that a very important issue is that people can speak in public without shame. And I think this whole issue that there is a free public discourse, a free public debate is absolutely critical to a human rights-based approach. And I think I don't know if this helps you.
Well, maybe I could just add just a little bit just for information and also just to clarify a few things, right? Because as Tulu-Titnell Partnership and as many other people are engaged in small-scale fisheries research, we probably would submit to. I mean, you can hardly do whatever we're doing without that true collaboration and a partnership. And I have had experience myself when people actually say that people don't necessarily listen to us, but you're working with us and you are collaborating and speaking not necessarily on our behalf, but at least representing what we may nobody listens directly to them. So that's something we learned from. And so organizing this kind of congress is always tricky, right? Because the TBTI is a research partnership, but it's a research partnership that really has that strong engagement with community groups. So the Congress Committee basically has decided that when we talk about the science, community, and policy, the voice of the community would be from the community, and that is actually why they basically decided that they would be able to speak. I think that given us a very good overview of what different fishing communities and fishing organizations and civil society organizations in support of fisheries have been doing. So tomorrow, there is a whole day that is about community. So in the plenary session, you would see that we have invited fishing people to speak at the plenary session, and then there'll be a second round even in the plenary that is again about the fishing people, the fishing associations and groups to do the plenary session. And then, as you may have seen here today, as we saw today in the Science Cafe, tomorrow it will be Fisher Talk Circles. And that will be again the voice of the fishers that we'd be very interested in hearing. So I hope that this format would help a little bit in terms of getting that voice out. But of course, there's platform for everybody, different platform, different venues. So I think one of the things that we can also do would be trying to think about what would be other ways to create that kind of platform so that every voice is heard. Thank you for that comment. Anybody else? Okay, so sorry, a question from here first, and then we'll come back to this table.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es David Chacón, soy pescador artesanal de Costa Rica y creo que ya me ha aclarado un poquito la situación, pero sí como pescador sí me preocupa un poquito desde la visión de la academia y la visión de nosotros los pescadores, y es que tiene que haber una correlación en la toma de decisiones entre nosotros y la academia. La investigación es excelente y tenemos que usarlo como herramienta, pero también tienen que usar el conocimiento tradicional de nosotros los pescadores, de las comunidades, para tomar conjuntamente las mejores decisiones para el bienestar de las comunidades y el bienestar del recurso. O sea, pescadores, comunidad, investigación, academia, todos tenemos que ir de la mano para tomar la mejor decisión.
Okay, David is a fisher from Costa Rica, and he is thinking that, well, he has it clear now after this discussion, but he wants to know how we're thinking about linking traditional knowledge with academics and with policy. And that he believes is very important since the information that they have concerning all these issues that are being sometimes researched by the academics is sometimes necessary to make the right policies and the right decisions for the management of resources.
Okay, how to get to integrate traditional knowledge? I'm looking at you, of course.
Well, first I want to acknowledge Tero Mustonen, who's also well known for the work he's done with indigenous knowledge. Your comment is important because I see Fisher's knowledge as a very important element of fishery management. By bringing Fisher's knowledge into management, you're automatically getting into joint management or co-management. Without the Fisher knowledge, basically decisions are made on the basis of what the manager has as his or her own knowledge. But by giving priority to, or at least recognition of, local and indigenous knowledge, puts you automatically into that Amartya Sen territory of what's important for the people themselves.
Anybody else like to add to that? Are we okay? All right, so let's turn to this table. Please.
My name's Amy. I'm a junior academic at James Cook University, and I work in the livelihood space as a social scientist in some of the more vulnerable communities around the world. And I find myself becoming increasingly frustrated with basically feeling like the work that I do doesn't make a difference to the communities where I work. And I know this is a common sort of gripe of academics, but it leaves me thinking, you know, is academia even the right place for me to be if that's what I want to achieve? So, but then you guys are all really inspiring. Many of you have achieved that in academics. So I guess what I'm asking is, do you have any advice for some of the mechanisms or sort of strategies that we could employ throughout our careers to actually try to achieve some kind of difference within those communities?
Excellent. Okay. Thank you for that question. And one of you would answer.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It's a question which a lot of academics have. And I think it's important first to, as an academic, I don't think you are there to change the world for the people there. So if you are there to articulate, an issue which you identify there, then I think you should be willing to take the mode of a learner first, and not going there with your frameworks and so on, thinking that you know a lot, and trying to get that reality fitted into your framework. So I think this is a problem which a lot of academics have. They go with their frameworks. I don't say you have that, but a lot of academics go with your specific disciplinary or transdisciplinary frameworks, and then try to squeeze that reality into that framework. So that is part of the problem. The other problem I see is that people, some places get so over-researched that the community knows what you have come for. So they would even ask you, what is it, sociology or anthropology?
They tell you the thing you want to hear, right?
Yes, because there's the joke that what is the family structure in Africa? This is the father, mother, children, and the anthropologist. So sometimes that is the problem that you face, because you've gone to a place where it's so much research that people are fatigued bounds. So it's also to do with the choice of place, isn't it? You need to choose a place which is. So I just stopped because Sven is.
Sven's about to grab microphone from you, so let's just.
Well, I don't necessarily see myself as a researcher. I see myself perhaps more as an educator. I know, of course, that I'm doing both, but I work with young people. I am a professor. I try to help them, and the students that I'm working with do not come from an elite background. They come from fisheries communities, and where they have grown up, and what I can teach them should certainly not replace what they know, but perhaps add to it and help them reflect on the things they often tend to take for granted. I have a sort of a poster on my office door, which is a quote from a university basketball coach in the U.S., and it says, it's what you learn after you know it all that counts. And what I hope to accomplish by that is that, you know, the learning process doesn't stop with an education. It's not the end of the beginning, but it's sort of that's where it starts, and you have to continue to learn after you have studied what's in your textbook, and don't believe that you will find the solutions to all the problems that are out there necessarily in the textbook, and you may end up in a powerful position where you can do a lot of harm if you believe that you have the solution already before you even start. I make a point about not just conveying, but also make a point of trying to install in the students that I have a certain wisdom, a certain appreciation for the fact that there is a world out there, that the problems are often more complex than you experience from the textbook. But it also comes with an attitude to life and with a respect for those that you are going to work to, and don't believe that you have the answers and that you have just the questions and they have the answers. They also have a right to question you. Having said that, I have also found myself in situations with people from fisher organization which has raised this kind of question, this fatigue kind of question. Is that, we are together when it comes to educating the next generation, the young people who are going to take over one time. Don't believe that this is just our responsibility. So you may be tired of the question. You may have heard it before, but still, you do have a responsibility to take part in the process of educating or teaching or conveying the kind of knowledge, and also the moral knowledge to the next question. Don't leave necessarily that to the university. Don't think that you are not part of that process. So you also have a responsibility to be appreciative and respectful for the young people that knocks on your door and asks questions that you find to be silly.
We have time for one more question. Sebastian, Alina, or both? Well, if you keep it brief and we just keep the answer brief, we might be able to get to the.
Yeah, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I see that the speakers are equally divided between whether the glass is half full or half empty when you look at sports education in the future.
Yes.
So given that sort of perspective, I would like to know responsibility to small-scale fishing communities, and if we believe that there is a future, can we better secure that future? Of course, these instruments are there, but then I would like to make sure that there is a sufficient demand from the mainstream community to stand by the small-scale fishers and fishing communities, from untamed reasons one can think of. And whether that can be sort of, that integrity between the supply side and demand side can be sort of realized, say not through corporatization of the market, but through trying to find out small-scale outlets of fish. So we are having integrity right through the supply chain. We don't work with small-scale producers and with the corporate fish suppliers. So can we bring a very conscious focus on the small scale at every stage, so that small-scale producers, small-scale retailers, so we don't cater the family shop. So therefore, I think that integrity we can bring back, I think then there is a future. And in that future, whether we can think in terms of combining fishing and aquaculture. We don't have to see them as separately different departments. So bring tenure rights to combine fishery rights and aquaculture rights to adjacent water bodies and land, so that you can see that integrity is maintained. And then maintaining that integrity and the diversity, they can look forward to linking up with people in the market chain who are also small retailers. So can we think in terms of that kind of a future? So I would like to hear what the panelists have to say on imagining a different way of looking at our own small-scale communities and their relationship with fish.
Before we do that, that's a great question. Thank you. Maybe Lena, you'd like to just ask you a question quickly, and then we'll just wrap that up with both questions.
Thank you. Well, this is a little like a woman thinking through the section, so it's a little, so you can see how my ideas have been changing through the section. Because at the beginning I was a little bit with you, like, well, the situation is the same, like you said at the beginning, nothing changed. Actually, the situation in the small-scale fisheries sometimes is getting worse in some places. So it's like we've lost hope. And should we continue working in this field, or we'll just give up and continue and going back to the lab and work on, I don't know, in something else. So at the beginning I was thinking of that, and then through the section you make a really good points that make me summarize like some advices that are like key points, like to work in human rights, to work, to do more activism or resistance, to work in innovation and creativity, to have the political approach, as John said, and in enjoying these recommendations with all the work that everyone is doing in the field, in the small scale fisheries research, it looks to me that we have like we are able or we are ready to write a dummies book, or like the yellow one, about the small scale fisheries. Like we have the key points, what we should do, and how. But there are other things that, from my developing perspective, country, since I am coming from Colombia, there are things that I don't know how we can deal, and I would like to ask you, what do you recommend us, how to deal with this, because are out of our domain, like our league, like corruption, violence, displacement, and political will, that I would like to hear about them. Thank you.
Okay. Well, let's make this the last round. Perhaps, I would like to invite all our speakers to speak to those points or anything else that you'd like to say, as this is really, this will be the last round. So where's the microphone? It's right here. start, Sven. Thank you.
I feel that we should not underestimate the merits of perspectives, language, conceptual frameworks that we have as academic and which we are trained in and which we are bringing with us out there. We need concepts, we need analytical frameworks in order to see things. Concepts allow us to see things. And I think one of the things that they allow us to see is how things hang together. When we insist of looking at communities and small-scale fisheries as a system, it is exactly that point. We want to see what is dependent on what. And these interdependencies are not often clear, not even to those that are part of them. They require they require research. You have to really look carefully into the many subtle ways that things have together, that makes things hang together. So when someone says that in order to, for instance, have a sustainable fishery, you have to have sustainable communities. Communities have to work on so many levels in order for them to be effective stewards of their resources. This is an intriguing argument, but to show that that is actually the case requires a bit of research, I would argue, a bit of time, and for that you need to go deep, and in order to go deep, you need a conceptual framework that points you in the direction of what to look for when you want to determine those factors that makes a community hang together in such a way that they can carry out their responsibilities or the tasks that they could potentially have. It's not enough to have rights. There has to be something more that enable communities to actually exercise those rights in an effective manner. And what exactly those mechanisms are, those factors are, what it is that enables communities to actually taking on such a responsibility is an intriguing situation. You know, with rights comes responsibilities, and therefore, as we think of rights, we at the same time have to think of the responsibilities. And there are certain rights that we think of as negative rights. There are rights, you know, with regard to not to be harassed, not your rights being taken away from you. So there are a lot of those rights, and they are also in the small-scale fisheries guidelines. And when you think about human rights, they tend to be largely related to those negative rights. You know, you have a right to maintain a livelihood. You have a right to make sure that a fisheries management system doesn't take the food out of your mouth. You know, you have to think about that. But if you are going to acquire rights that privileges would be a good synonymous for, then they come with responsibilities. And how communities, if they are granted, for instance, tenure rights, how they actually going to manage responsibly with regard to those rights requires a little bit of hard thinking, I would argue. And I think we as academics, we can at least help to engage in a deliberation on what basis, what principles should actually guide the exercise of those responsibilities, given that you have acquired some rights. So I do think that academics have a role to play. I don't think we necessarily should think of the work we do as something that is coming out of the mouth of some privileged people. I think we have a role to play. We are on the same team. We just have to think hard about how we divide our responsibilities and our contributions. And I do not think that academics should necessarily speak on behalf of small-scale fishing people, but they might have something to say about the kind of mechanism, the kind of platforms that would help to actually empower those voices.
Thank you.
Thanks. I want to return to the point of transdisciplinarity. That's one of our themes. We are academics, but the kind of work we do, I think, makes us necessarily interdisciplinary and possibly transdisciplinary. So I don't think we need to apologize for being too academic or too activist. We are academics, we are teachers, we are researchers, and we have to be activists. I think one of the messages coming out of the panel, one of the few things that we can probably all agree on is that there is a role for activism, but that's not a role in which we speak on behalf of communities, but we have to facilitate the communities, we have to empower the communities to speak for themselves. One of the new developments I see coming, possibly in the next generation of researchers here, is that I think we need more of the practitioner-scholar type. Not somebody who sits at the university all the time or at the government desk all the time or FAO desk, but rather is engaged with communities, small, large, including aquaculture, so that they're connected to the issues and they can engage with the issues. That's what I see. That's in part answering Andrew's question. I would say one of the ways that I'd like to see the new generation come up to be these kinds of scholar practitioners.
Thank you. But he's not done writing.
My memory is slowly fading, so I better take some notes.
Sure.
Well, I would like to come back to the points Sebastian raised on how do we get the larger community to stand by the small-scale fishing communities. I think it's a very important point. I also believe that we cannot put the onus entirely on the small-scale fisheries communities for the management of the coastal resources. I think it's just asking too much, considering the complexity of the situation which we have. If we look at some of the fisheries, when you're like in Bangladesh, 200,000 fishermen exploiting the Hilsa resources with 40,000 vessels, and asking them, if we hand over the tenure rights over these fisheries, then please go ahead and do it. It's just an impossibility. So, but on the point of the larger community, I'm speaking now from my experience in Germany and how powerful the social media pick up certain issues and quickly get rid of wrong policies sometimes, or implementing quickly something very positive. It's amazing on in how many areas this is now happening. And so I think I see that as a real potential future, and I'm glad to ignore starting on this social media side. I think for example, we could have, well, the ICSF Samudra alerts, for example, as a mobilizing force to help confront violations of human rights of fishing communities. Things like this are potentially very, very important, and to get quickly a powerful force around the globe on even certain, issues which happen nationally. Having said that, I think on the more pessimistic side, referring to what you mentioned with issues like corruption, violence, displacement, if it is something which is more common within the country as an issue, then I'm very pessimistic how the small-scale fisheries side could make a difference, because they are in the national context, such a small group of people. So if the national situation has a lot of these issues, then I think you really have to, so to say, try to somewhat, if you can, insulate the community from these wider developments. But if that is possible, I'm not so hopeful. On the issue of the larger community standing by small-scale fisheries to their fish buying behavior, again, an experience from Germany is that there is much more attention given to regional products rather than, let's say, globalized imports, which in the context of fisheries could also be important, that you actually support your local small-scale fisheries, and you become more aware of what are the issues related to the people who actually supply this fish. So I see some potential in this regard.
That's great, thank you.
I think that a couple of the questions had been answered, so I'm not going to go into the questions. There are 3 points I want to make. The one is that one should separate what is clicktivism, where you can stage a protest via social media and you feel good about the protest, but you stay in your comfort zone, and what is activism, really working and awareness raising with the communities. And I think that we must be cautious of just too soon to click in terms of an issue and not understanding the issue very well. I also think that the other issue that I want to say is that we need that small-scale fisheries should not be seen in isolation of other struggles, whether it's on land and other natural resources. I think alliances with the broader natural resources and land issues is crucial for the future of small-scale fisheries. I've been at the Institute of Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies called PLAS, and they're basically land and agrarian issues. And the themes, cross-cutting issues, are similar in terms of the struggles, the issues, and the problems small-scale producers face and small-scale fisheries. So I think that's definitely an alliance. There's also the last point that I want to make, that we also need critical scholarship. And critical scholarship means that we don't naturally follow the next framework or concept that is popularized. A lot of the critical scholarship we might not find within fisheries, but we might find in other fields. And I think for us as scholars in research, or academics and young scholars, read outside your comfort zone to understand fully the issues. For example, when you deal with food security and nutrition, if you need to understand nutrition, you're not going to find it within the fisheries literature. You need to understand, you need to read outside the literature. And I think that what is also lacking for me, and what I think it is important for the future, is that critical scholarship lens that we need to kind of maintain. One more point, the fourth point, is methodology. I think that a lot of the research focused on mega data, big data, for the big papers, for the high impact journals, and I have absolutely no problems with that. But I think what is also needed is in-depth case study, the way an anthropologist like Martin would do it, like Sven would initially look at it, like we will look at the thick descriptions of the issues in the communities. And I think that we need to also look at what our methodology is, to be able to kind of come up with what are the key issues, and not looking for that tailor-made package, that technical approach that we have, and the language that are so apoliticized that you can't challenge it. I think that we need to go back to the basics is, for me, important.
Thank you. Now, Joe, would you like to just, you didn't give it up now.
Just a minute. I mean, I think looking around, I feel that there is the more critical issue for small-scale fisheries is not in the sea or in the water, but it's on the land. And to that extent, there's a certain mutuality of interests. We have to see both on the water and the land. And this means, for academics, it means widening your horizon beyond fisheries and all that into other sectors. And for activists, I think this means building alliances more than just within the fishery. So, it means linking up with the peasants or with those who are struggling against industrialization or whatever. So it calls for widening of our concerns and not narrowing down of concerns. I think the future is really, for small-scale fisheries, would lie in the widening of the concerns that academics and activists have.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for very inspiring conversation and for sharing your stories. They are very, I hope everybody agrees that they're very inspiring, and we've learned a lot from your experience, and I'm optimistic, an eternal optimist, so I hope that we can all take home the messages that you share with us, and do our job and play our role in the society to promote and support the sustainable small-scale fisheries. So we have, thank you, yes, Miguel, why don't you do that? So with a round of applause, and a little bit, and if anybody would like to take pictures, this is the time. Thank you very much, everybody. I apologize for the time, but for something this good, we don't want to cut it short. We'll be seeing you maybe in a little more than half an hour next door, or I think.